This podcast is sponsored by Tusk, a continuity of business solution for industries that struggle with traditional banking. Check them out on the web at tusk.network. The Rob McNealy program is the nexus of cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and entrepreneurship. Now, welcome to the program. Today, we are talking with Jordan Last, and he is a Utah-based software developer and tech enthusiast, and he is building an amazing app called Podcrypt for the crypto and podcasting community. And I thought that his idea was so novel and interesting, I wanted to bring him on the show so you guys can hear what he's up to. So, Jordan, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well.
I appreciate you coming on the show. I think I've been a big fan of what you've been doing since you started. And so I'm glad that you finally are getting to a point where you feel like you can come on the show and talk about it. So before we get going here, let's just talk about a little bit about you, kind of what's your background, how, I think everybody talks about, oh, they're a software developer, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think that gets to the heart of, who are the people behind these projects? So tell me, how'd you get here?
All right. I did grow up in California in the Bay Area. So my dad was a software engineer in Silicon Valley. I feel like that has a lot to do with kind of my passion and desire for tech and things. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I was a normal kid. I loved to have fun. I played Pokemon. I did the Game Boys and Nintendo 64. And I feel like video games were probably kind of a big driver for me going into tech as well. Like, it was mesmerizing as a child, and I wanted to figure out kind of how to build stuff like that. So yeah, I had a great time. Went to, elementary school, middle school, high school. Finally, the time came to go to college, and I went to Brigham Young University in Utah.
Good school.
Yeah, it was a pretty good experience.
So where does crypto fit in all this? How did you get into crypto?
So I studied computer science at BYU. It was kind of the obvious choice. It's just what I wanted to do. And a few years into my degree, probably near the tail end, I started an ed tech company with some friends. And I was the CTO of that company. There were only like three of us, but three of us founders. So I was in charge of the entire tech stack, figuring out all the databases and figuring out, the back-end technologies, front-end technology and everything. And so that kind of got me thinking, like, how can we simplify all of this infrastructure? And it's very difficult to have all this hardware and all this software running. And right near the end of my degree, I took a distributed systems class where we, talked about distributed systems and gossip protocols and things like that. And it was just about that time that I first decided to really look into Bitcoin. And when I figured out what that Ethereum was actually a thing, and a blockchain, Ethereum and everything, it's kind of like these are the ultimate distributed systems in my mind in some ways. And so I feel like blockchain just started answering a lot of it's kind of the answer to a lot of the issues that I have seen come up being in charge of tech stacks. And then the cryptocurrency part is just fascinating as well. Especially if you're doing any kind of startup or any kind of business, you have to deal with finances. And so, as I've played around with Stripe and trying to get payments down and kind of going through the legalese and reading about the fraud and everything, like, blockchain and cryptocurrency, in my mind, solves a lot of problems for me as kind of a CTO type of person.
I couldn't agree more. I think the beginnings of, we're still in the beginnings of blockchain right now, and I think the applications are, immense and paradigm shifting. And I would say in the next 10 to 15 years, I think the world is going to be a very different place from the tech perspective because of it. So
I agree.
So let's talk about Podcrypt, your app. Tell me a little bit about, give a high level overview. Not everybody that listens to the show is, a hardcore developer. So what is Podcrypt?
So in its the most basic way to describe it, it is a podcast listening app, also known as a podcatcher, I believe. You can search for podcasts. You can subscribe in a basic way. Hit play, hit pause. Kind of does the normal stuff that a podcast app would do. And then it keeps track of your time for each podcast. So, I listen to the Rob McNealy show for 2 hours or some other show for 30 minutes. It also lets you load up cryptocurrency into its wallet. So there's a crypto wallet built in. Right now it's an Ethereum wallet. And it lets you set an interval and a payout amount. And when your interval comes up, the app will pay out to all the podcasts that you have listened to during the interval that you set, based on how much time you've listened to them. And in a nutshell, that's it.
So when people load up Podcrypt, so is that a smart contract? Are the funds kind of being held in a smart contract somewhere, or how does that part work?
Yeah, there are no smart contracts that are specific to Podcrypt involved. It all is just peer-to-peer transactions, essentially. So you load up. There's very little crypto going on in most of the app. The only time you really interact with Ethereum is when you create a wallet. It will generate a public and private key for you. It will store the private key in the app, in the browser, essentially. And it will expose the public key to you so that you can send funds. But it's just basic Ethereum transactions right now. So I've been doing it with MetaMask. I just put my Podcrypt public key into MetaMask, and I say send some ETH. Within, 30 seconds or a minute, my ETH is in my app on Podcrypt. And then because Podcrypt has access to your private key, it's able to sign and send transactions to all of the podcasts that you listen to. If the podcast has signed up, and by signed up, I mean they've put their Ethereum address into the description of their podcast. So that's how Podcrypt is able to find out where to send the funds for each podcast. The owner actually puts their Ethereum address into the description. And the owner, theoretically, is the only one who has access to the RSS feed, and the description is a key element of the RSS feed, and so it's kind of a perfect way to do that part.
So it's not going to be hijacked very easily.
Yep, not easily.
So I know we've talked before, and you were pretty early on and more almost in the conceptual stage when we first met a while back. Where are you in the development process of Podcrypt?
So, yeah, I came up with the idea last summer of 2018, and I tried to do some validation on it in September, and I don't know, kind of petered out, so I was working on some other stuff. Then pretty much on January 1st of 2019, so just a couple months ago, I decided to give one more huge push, and I had a goal of getting 100 members into the Telegram group to prove initial interest before actually, writing any real code for it. February 20th, we reached that goal. That was pretty cool. And for the next month, I built the pre-alpha, essentially. So it took, a week or two to get the pre-alpha up so that, anyone could at least just go play around with it. And just released the alpha yesterday, I believe.
So can anybody...
We're in alpha.
You're in alpha right now. So can anybody sign up for this, or is this like an invitation-only beta test kind of thing, or?
Nope, it's fully open. I have no servers. There's no account that you have to get with me. Everything's happening client side in the app. So yeah, essentially you're just generating an Ethereum public and private key, and you're just joining the normal podcast ecosystem by searching with the iTunes API, and then, pulling the app pulls the audio files from the RSS feed. So yeah, it's fully open. Anyone can go and play with it. You just have to realize it's an alpha, and so, essentially any money you send to it could just be erased and lost somehow. I don't know. Just a disclaimer.
Well, that's noted. So long term, what do you hope to do with Podcrypt? Where do you see this kind of going?
So I would love, like in the ultimate vision, I would really love to change monetization in podcasting. I feel like there are some issues with it.
With monetization?
With monetization in podcasting, yeah. You could probably speak to this more, because I'm not personally a podcaster. I just listen to podcasts. But I feel like there's a lot of effort goes into trying to find sponsorships, and there's a lot that goes on if you try to monetize outside of actually making the core product, which is your podcast. So I'm hoping, by kind of cutting out the middleman and allowing users to just give back directly, hopefully we can make podcast monetization a little bit more fair, a little bit more equitable, and, maybe bring in a lot more money than there actually is currently in podcasting.
Well,
and go ahead.
Well, that's what has me excited about what you're doing, and monetization is certainly a piece, right? Currently right now, with many podcasts out there, if you're, a content creator, if you're on one of the big sites, Patreon or, YouTube or whatever, I mean, they're getting a big cut, and, monetizing on YouTube is, changed dramatically. I think they get 70% of the haul now, which is, pretty ridiculous if you ask me.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. But I think the thing that is kind of fascinating to me and exciting to me about what you're doing with Podcrypt is that you're basically making it so you're taking away what I would call the deplatforming risks. We've seen, especially over the last year, major online content creators that have built these, really tremendously large followings on other people's social media sites, of course, to, monetize what they're doing, for political reasons, or because their view of the world doesn't jive with the platform owners, terms of service or, political outlook. They're being deplatformed. And what I like about what you're doing with Podcrypt is the fact is you're pulling out the platform and you're letting people who are podcast listeners be able to compensate in a way they feel, good about directly to the content creators. And to me, and you and I've spoken, offline about this, but one of my big missions is to make it so you can't stop the signal. And I mean that in a variety of ways, whether it's communications or content or, transactions for commerce. I would love to see a place where, people can't just be shut down. That whole censorship resistant thing we hear about a lot in crypto. So I think that's the most fascinating thing about what you're doing is you're just basically completely, cutting out the platforms so that content creators can't be deplatformed. And I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that too.
So what are the realistic expectations? I mean, this is an alpha, right? So, I expect there'll be, building materials laying around, people with saws in the living room, that kind of thing. No, I'm just kidding. But so what is a Podcrypt, what's your feature list going to be eventually? Where are you right now? And what would be the kind of features you'd like to add to it later on?
Yeah, okay. So realistic expectations, I feel like realistically, Podcrypt can handle, it will probably top out somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 users, just talking with some other people in the podcast industry and observing, I guess, other apps that people have tried to build.
Is that a blockchain bottleneck, or what's the bottleneck on that?
I think it's just people choosing to use the app. It's a market bottleneck. I don't think Podcrypt could handle every podcast. Well, I don't know. I feel like millions of people could use it and it'd be fine. I don't know if Ethereum would scale, but the app itself is fine. The podcasting infrastructure is already there, and I'm writing on top of that, so that's fine. I don't think it's realistic to think that Podcrypt itself, an entirely new podcast application, is going to come in and be able to take a significant chunk of the podcasting market. There's like 16 to 46 million avid podcast listeners in the United States alone, and I mean, I'd love for Podcrypt to take a huge chunk of that, but just my realistic expectation, somewhere between 10 and 100,000 users is what I think the market will do. I could be totally wrong, obviously.
Well, I'm more optimistic. So let's just say you're going to get a much bigger chunk of that market. I think once people, start hearing about this and seeing what it can do, I think you're going to get a lot more people interested in this personally.
Sweet.
Okay, so addressable markets, kind of talked a little bit about that, and maybe we disagree with that.
I can go a little bit more into the feature set if you want.
Walk me through it.
So I feel like generally we're going to be able to provide most of the features that people want in their podcast apps. I am really trying to make this a progressive web app and stay on the web platform as far as possible, because then I don't need to go through, the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. I don't need to be beholden to their terms. Also,
which cuts out middlemen again.
Yeah. So less platformers there. And then to make it even more decentralized, if I keep it a web app, I can take the static assets. Right now, the app is just static assets. It's just a bunch of files that I have running on a CDN. So what I could do is just deploy that to IPFS or Ethereum Swarm, which are distributed file storage systems. And I could, decentralize it even more through that way. Hopefully get rid of some DNS hijacking risks in that way. Essentially make this thing impossible to take down eventually. So that'd be pretty cool. But all the basic features that you'd want. I feel like the web platform is definitely maturing, and it might take a year or two for everything to settle and be able to completely replace a native app, but I'm actually pretty optimistic that the tech right now is definitely good enough for an MVP and maybe good enough for quite a few users.
So how many people are on your team?
Officially just me right now. I do have 2 other people that I'm hoping, at least one of them I'm definitely bringing on as a co-founder, and then trying to decide for a third person.
So how are you funding the development?
I have a part-time job that I make enough money in.
So you're not, you don't have any, so you're not getting any investor money? Are you looking to do an investor raise, or?
I mean, if an investor wants to talk, I'd talk to them, but not looking for a raise right now. I don't see the need currently. And I really don't want to take someone's money unless I absolutely have to. So.
Well, it sounds like you're a traditional American bootstrapping entrepreneur, and you got my respects for that, because I think we don't have enough of that anymore. And that's kind of what we're doing with my own crypto project, right? Tusk is, everybody on the team, no one's getting paid. Everybody's a volunteer working, toward a goal and working for a share of tokens. And we don't have any overhead. And then it's funny and sad all at the same time to see all these, crypto projects that did these amazing, massive raises over the last year and a half, 2 years, and they're all going belly up. And it's sad because it's completely unnecessary. Some of these, I always look at it like, well, some of these projects is like, and I'm not going to, poke at anybody in particular, but, you're hearing about these different various foundations with literally hundreds of employees on their staff. or, you know, some of these foundations would literally have millions of dollars a month in their treasuries, and they haven't written a line of code in a year. And it's like, you know, yeah, you know, I'm like, I don't understand, because, you know, if you're
I don't even know what I would do with 100 people.
you know what, I have a, you know, our project, we have, including our advisors and ambassadors, we have about 18 people all in, and I feel like there's not enough stuff for them to do, you know, and I agree. My wife has a day job, and her company's, you know, got a lot of revenue, and they have like 30 people there, and their revenue is in the tens of millions every year at her company. And you know, when you have these, you know, there was this one foundation, I'm not going to say which project, but, you know, they had 135 people and they don't have any revenue. They don't have any sales. They don't have any customers. And yet they have 135 people on staff. And I just don't know what they're doing. It just seems ridiculous to me. But I think that's why the crypto market's going to change a lot. I think over the next year and a half, as all these projects start washing out of the ecosystem, because they spent all the money and didn't really have a plan to get customers. But speaking of customers, you know, and businesses, how are you doing this out of a labor of love, or is there a way to make money with Podcrypt? What's your business model with this project?
Yeah, so the main business model right now is that in your list of podcasts to donate to, Podcrypt will come up as a line item, essentially. And so right now it's hard coded to 10%. I'm kind of just seeing if people will even give me any money for it. Someone tried to this morning, but the app broke, so I almost made my first ETH with it.
Wonderful.
But so yeah, in spirit, I got the first ETH, but didn't actually work. Yeah, so Podcrypt come up as a line item, hard coded 10% right now. I think what I would like to do though is open it up and essentially let the user customize everything with their donations, so they can turn a donation off for a podcast 1 month and for Podcrypt if they want to. They can turn the Podcrypt percentage up and down, and same thing with their podcasts. They could also do that. So we'll see how far that gets me. There's a few other business models. One would be a featured podcast. So kind of in the left side menu below your main podcast item, you could have a featured item and maybe have people pay a monthly fee in ETH to be featured, and, you know, explicitly say that people are paying for this. Maybe I'm thinking I could have like 10 slots there and have kind of like a tiered structure. So, you know, the first slot would be more expensive than the last slot. Is that, I was kind of thinking of maybe a crowd fund. So maybe up and coming podcasts who have no users, maybe don't even have a podcast yet, maybe it's just an idea, they could apply to be listed on Podcrypt. And because people are hopefully using Podcrypt to donate back already, and they already have money in their wallet in Podcrypt, it'll be pretty easy for them. Oh, I'd like to fund this podcast, and I could maybe take a cut of that funding. And there's a couple other ideas. I'm maybe keeping on the down low a little bit, but I'll just throw one out there. So as far as I understand, there is a problem with statistics in podcasting. Like, the advertisers don't have the best data available because the podcast hosting services or whatever don't have the best data available either, and the advertisers just have to ask the podcast hosts pretty much, how many downloads do you have? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there's kind of some weirdness to that, just from the fact that a lot of the third-party hosts, you're getting the data from them, and they're paying you generally. So, you know, are you getting, you know, there's always that black box. Are you getting what you actually, you know, are they downplaying the number of listens or what have you? Because, you know, they don't want to pay you. We don't
Yeah.
know. I'm not accusing anybody, but you just don't know because there's
Yeah,
no
exactly.
transparency there. It's like a black box.
Exactly.
And then, like, I don't use for my own podcast for this show, I don't use a third party host. I am, I wouldn't say petrified, but I'm suspicious of third party hosts. And as we're seeing with deplatforming, you know, when's the next deplatform going to be the podcast host, right? Are they going to start going after those guys and saying, oh, you're not politically correct enough, or you have a difference of opinion or something? And now all of a sudden, boom, you know, your RSS feed was coming from the host, not from your own website. So now you got to start over again. So I just said, I host my own files, and I'm kind of old school because I was podcasting originally about 10 years ago, and they didn't have really the podcast host very much as a thing back then. You had to host your own content for the most part. So I just got comfortable with that. But even in the world of social media and things like that, I'm a big believer of hosting your own, you know, blogs on your own sites that you control, hosting your own podcasts on your own site if you can control that, just because I think it's safer. You know, all of a sudden one of the big boys decides to shut you down and you're gone, and you might have spent years building out and spending lots of money on top of that trying to build, you know, an audience and a following, and you could just have that shut off in an instant anymore. So to me, you know, maybe I'm paranoid, but I don't believe it's a good foundation necessarily to build a business on someone else's app or what have you that you don't have any say in or control over. And we've seen it, especially in the last year, where, you know, especially, you know, Alex Jones, for instance, and I wouldn't say that I'm a huge fan of Alex Jones. He's amusing sometimes, but, you know, where every one of the major, you know, social media platforms colluded to deplatform him simultaneously. You know, they had a conversation about it because of the timing of it. And to me, that's just scary, what you're seeing out there. And I think, you know, what you're doing with Podcrypt fixes that a lot, because now you don't have to be reliant on other people's platforms to get your word out and try to monetize something. And obviously selling ads is, you know, guys who want to do podcasts, I want to do a podcast. I don't want to go out and try to sell advertising for what I'm doing. I'd much rather some people, if they, you know, they like what I'm saying, you know, they can donate, and that's cool. So you decided to build this on Ethereum. You know, is there a particular reason you chose Ethereum, say, over EOS or, you know, some other, you know, basic platform or crypto
pretty much
blockchain platform?
So Podcrypt is a financial application, essentially. So I chose the platform with the biggest network effects, in my opinion, that has the soundest decentralized, you know, financial capabilities. And I feel like I really like the Ethereum community. People are already using ETH for decentralized finance type things. So, and I'm familiar with the programming model, and I like it. So it's just, I think it's a really good starting point.
So do you ever look to expand into other cryptocurrencies, or are you going to stick with ETH, you think?
Definitely for MVP, ETH. The next cryptocurrency that I'm going to implement, multiple people have requested this, is, and I would really like it myself as well, is DAI, the stable coin by MakerDAO.
Okay.
That would get rid of lots of the volatility issues. I guess I'll see how that goes. And a lot of people want Bitcoin based on my validation. So
I'm sure they do. So since you're technically not a native app, you're a web app, is it really that hard to implement, you know, different blockchains in their wallets?
I guess it depends on how good their JavaScript libraries are. But yeah, I mean, technically it's probably not that difficult to do.
Well, wonderful. Well, I hope that someday.
Probably not that difficult.
Well, I certainly hope when we're, you know, someday we can talk about getting Tusk on there once we've matured our project a little bit. So one of the things that I was also wondering about, you know, with your app, it's a listening app, but are you going to do a directory inside the app at all?
So, yeah, one big platform risk is the centralized podcast directories that are out there.
Right.
I feel like, so iTunes has one. I think
Well,
it's the most popular.
I think iTunes has the biggest one, don't they?
Probably. I believe Spotify has one. Other companies have them, I imagine.
Stitcher and yeah.
Yeah. And so far, like, dealing with the iTunes search API has been amazing. I actually really like it. But at any point in time, iTunes could decide to shut it off.
Then what?
Or they could decide they want to monetize it or change it, do whatever they want with it. Yeah, and then the biggest way people might be discovering your podcast will just potentially be gone. So an idea I have, which I would like to validate, but multiple podcast owners, you and at least 2 others, have said they like this idea. Creating a decentralized podcast directory on Ethereum, it wouldn't actually be that difficult, and we could store some basic metadata about your podcast, such as the title and especially the RSS feed. And then you, as the podcast owner, you would own that little piece of the directory, and no one could change it unless they had your private key, and everybody would have access to it. And you could build, on top of that, you could build a centralized search API or whatever, but the core actual directory itself would be essentially shared and owned by the world and be extremely censorship resistant. So I feel like that'd be an interesting idea.
I think it's an amazing idea. So you're saying, so you would actually build it like a dApp on Ethereum or another blockchain, the actual directory itself.
Yeah, it'd just be a simple smart contract, and then you could build. I'd probably build a UI. I imagine I'd build a UI into Podcrypt to interact with it. I'd probably build, I don't know, I might have a standalone, like, decentralized podcast directory .eth or .app or .io or something. And anyone else could build a UI on top of it as well, but they would all be hooking into the same smart contract, which actually stores the data and restricts access to only the people who actually put the data on there.
Interesting. I think that could be an amazing idea. Again, it goes back to my mission to, make it so people can't stop the signal, and that would be a great way to do that. I mean,
we could totally do that, like, right now. It's like not that much data to store. It wouldn't be that expensive to put the data on. And so, I mean, I could probably build it in tonight if I wanted to, just a basic version. So it's an interesting idea.
You might want to look at EOS too for that, because the costs for do it on EOS would be a lot cheaper than doing it on Ethereum.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
that makes sense.
I mean, that's what I think, I think going forward, EOS is definitely, or even Tron, I don't know as much about their blockchain, but I think EOS, has some distinct advantages on their pricing models and compared to like Ethereum, and it's a lot faster. It's compared to Ethereum just because it's a DPoS instead of a proof of work chain. So it may be something to look at, I think, going forward. I just think for dApps and that kind of development, I think it's a better model than Ethereum is. I think Ethereum was an amazing proof of work for what it does, but even they are trying, to change their platform over to a different consensus mechanism, because it's just hard to do what they want to do on Ethereum. And if they themselves admit that that's what they need to do, but EOS is already there and in the market, they're just going to be light years ahead, I think, going forward. But we'll see. We'll see which one of the blockchains, wins in the end.
Yep.
So I think what you're doing is awesome, and I want the best for you. And I think you're going to do well. I think this wins on a couple different levels, and I think the world needs to hear about this. And any way that I can help promote what you're doing, you let us know, because we'll be happy to get out there. Get the word out, and I want you to come back on the show. Let me know what your progress is and things. So when you make it, reach new milestones, give me a ring and we'll get you out there. And I think overall, I love what you're doing. I'm really excited about it. I think I'm a little fangirl already about this. So, but before we go, can you tell people where they can find out more about Podcrypt and how they can get involved if they have want to get involved and do you need helpers or, where do people find out about you and how do they get in contact with you?
Sure. So if you want to use the app right now, just go to podcrypt.app in your browser. And you can use it on desktop, looks kind of ugly, or you could use it on Android, iOS, it looks a lot better. You can add it to home screen and play around with it. And if you want to get involved, probably the best thing to do is to go to the Telegram group. That's at t.me/podcrypt. And yeah, I'm on there all the time. People are always giving ideas. I'd love your feedback. I tend to implement the feedback that I get because the users, I would say, know best in many cases. So yeah, those are the two best places to reach the app or reach me.
Jordan Last, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Rob McNealy program. Make sure you check us out on the web at robmcnealy.com and subscribe to our podcast at YouTube, iTunes, and on the Google Play Store.